Well, ladies and gentlemen, if it wasn't for this blasted COVID-19, we'd all be together, enjoying each other's company and reveling in this quite amazing project that has seen us over the last 30 years. It's a great shame that in our 30th anniversary year we can't be together, but technology will allow us to at least, I think, feel a part of the project, and I hope give you guys a sense of what is going on. And I hope through all the correspondence that you receive, and we're conscious sometimes perhaps we bombard you with too much correspondence, but you can see from all that the value for money that you're getting from the delivery of these amazing machines. Now, who'd have thought 30 years ago, or perhaps just before, that somehow this wonderful organisation of ours would build a brand new steam locomotive for the main line. Let's just dwell on that for a second. A brand new steam locomotive. In 1968, when steam finished, it was predicted that there would be a flurry of mainline steam from the early 70s, but the engineering capability would wither on the vine, the old drivers would die off, and steam would come to a natural end. How utterly wrong we all were. The engineering base in railway heritage has built up to an extent that I think would surprise everybody who was thinking about this 30 years ago. The main line, which has become far more modern and fast and littered with electronic safety devices that intuitively are incompatible with steam, but nevertheless the modern railway tolerates steam and in many respects welcomes it, because you'll all recall those great words by Sir Peter Parker that steam warms the modern railway market. Now, we've got a situation where over time the elderly locos, and let's not forget Flying Scotsman is coming up to being a centenarian. Now, I genuinely believe that for the future, and we're talking 20, 30 years from now, the future on the main line, in my humble opinion, is going to be brand new metal, as exemplified by this amazing machine behind me. And the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust has been in the vanguard of delivering that concept. And it couldn't have been done without the support of so many people, many of whom are watching today. Now, 30 years seems to have, I was not around 30 years ago, not surprisingly. I'm well aware of the genesis of the organisation, and as your new chairman, it really is my privilege to be associated with the Trust. I've always been attracted, and I'm on record as saying this, I've always been attracted to high quality, ambitious projects of a prestigious nature, and by golly, this trust ticks all of those boxes for me. So when I was approached initially to become a trustee, that seemed to be a natural extension of my railway heritage career to date. Having watched Tornado evolve, having seen the frames once upon a time in Tyseley, when I was involved with Dinmore Manor, that's another story, and then in my position as the director of the National Railway Museum, to see the engine come there from time to time. So it was a natural extension of all that, and living just down the road near Catterick made it very convenient for me to be involved. But then to be offered the signal honour of becoming the chairman, well, that really was the icing on the cake. Now, we are undoubtedly facing an interesting time. The A1 Tornado, of course, has been beached for a while with no work to do because of COVID-19. And the challenge of trying to compensate for that income, that loss of income, is one that we are tackling now. The second issue is, of course, inevitably there has been an impact on the income stream for finishing the P2 behind us. And we are hoping now that the clouds are lifting in UK heritage terms, that we can encourage people to dig that little bit more deeply into their pockets to help us get over the finishing line. Now the engine is part of the many appeals that we've put out for the 30th anniversary, and you'll notice from the literature that we haven't called it an appeal because we've got so many projects, and we're a broad church, and we recognise that not everybody wants to put their money into an A1, not everyone wants to put their money into a P2, and eventually not everyone will want to put their money into a V4, although we're hoping that the latter will be an extremely popular project. But we've got a broad range of projects you can put your money into, and you will have heard separately that we have just recently acquired a second support coach for use in due course behind Prince of Wales. This beautiful machine stood behind me. Now, we need lots of money, and you need to be encouraged by the fact that your money is being spent wisely. And I'm privileged to have around me a quite amazing team, starting with the trustees. When we talk about volunteers, our instinct is to think, first of all, in terms of those who polish engines and get up and put the fire in the firebox and so on. But the reality is that all your trustees are volunteers. And the trustees are, with this organisation, almost occupying a second full-time job. And I don't take their commitment for granted for 1 second. We have an amazing engineering team here in Darlington that is working significant hours to make this work, and the stars are all lined up to ensure that this locomotive behind me is delivered as an operational machine by the end of 2022. But we need your support to get over that line. Now, there are some major elements to the project which are in hand. The rods are currently being manufactured by Stevenson's across in Lancashire, and of course the headline issue is we've got 2 brand new boilers on the way. First one to be delivered late this year, which will be initially to go on to Tornado, and we'll replace Tornado's current boiler during her next major service at the end of next year. And then the second one, which will be delivered to us next year, will go on to Prince of Wales, the loco behind me. Huge amount going on, and we need your support. We significantly need your support. Now let's just look back at how we've evolved. There have been myriad people involved with this project, and it would be remiss of me not to mention just 1 or 2. I mean, from the outset, of course, our first chairman was Mike Wilson, and then David Champion. And David has been, of course, really closely aligned with this project from the outset. And if you haven't seen it, in the latest edition of Steam Railway, there was a really good interview with him. And I want to mention also Barry Wilson, who was a major figure within the trust. Lots of former trustees. I'm not going to mention too many because I would not want to omit any individual. So there have been a raft of trustees over the last 30 years, all of whom have made a major and valuable contribution to what we are doing here. Now for the future, Darlington Locomotive Works, where we stand now, will be in due course handed back to Darlington Council as part of the so-called Railway Heritage Quarter project. And this is linked to the Stockton and Darlington 200 celebrations. It's a multi-million-pound project, and we are benefiting hugely from our relationship with Darlington, which recognises the benefits of having a locomotive engineering capacity in the town. So these are, on the one hand, challenging times. On the other hand, and I'm always a glass half full man, these are exciting times. There is no doubt that Tornado turns heads on the main line. And you will have seen by the time we have our conference that she's turning heads again in her new livery of British Railways Green. Some may be thinking, why have we gone away from apple green? It's a temporary measure, and it is to pay tribute to St Mungo, which of course, if St Mungo hadn't been scrapped in the 60s, the impetus to build Tornado would just not have been there. So, I hope you enjoy our virtual conference. We've got so much on offer. We want to engage with you. If you don't feel we're talking to you enough, tell us. We're always wanting to be briefed on how we're getting on in terms of communication. I believe we do reasonably well in that respect, but I know that we can do better. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back, enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.
Well, good morning everybody, and welcome to the next part of our virtual convention, where in the next 10 minutes or so I will summarise the few trains that we have run until the COVID-19 pandemic introduced us to the phenomenon of lockdown. I thought I would also cover some detail about the winter overhaul at Leeming Bar, and then say something about the work we've completed recently at Carnforth, repainting Tornado and her support coach. On the Pennine Explorer, Tornado delivered a spirited performance over Ace Gill for what was to be her final run over the S&C last year. Despite late departures, the train arrived outside Carlisle some 10 minutes ahead of schedule. And on the return, Tornado came off the train at Barrow Hill to hand the train over to the waiting Class 47 for the trip back to Leicester. The Illuminati on the 2nd of November was a first for the A1 Trust, as Tornado took a train across to Blackpool to view the famous illuminations. This rather atmospheric shot captured the moments as the train prepared to depart Blackpool back to Birmingham. After which Tornado and her sport coach ran on to stable at the Severn Valley Railway before our next mainline turn on the Marches and Severn Express. This was a Pathfinder tour originating at Eastleigh, with the steam leg behind Tornado starting at Gloucester. And from here the train headed down to Newport before running through the Marches to call at Ludlow and Shrewsbury. After a delayed departure on the return, we were early into the water stop at Magor, and despite getting away early, the train was held to time for the run back to Gloucester, where Tornado detached and ran back to stable again at Bridgnorth. The Christmas, Bath and Bristol Express departed from Wolverhampton after Tornado had joined the stock at Bescot Yard. After turning and servicing at Bristol, and despite a delayed departure, we were soon on our way back to Bath. And at Reading, Tornado and the support coach were swiftly detached from the train and continued their journey to stable overnight at Southall, whilst the train headed back to Wolverhampton behind a diesel. Sunday the 8th of December saw Tornado back in charge of her first Steam Dreams charter for quite some time. Departing from Ealing Broadway, good running and a quick water stop at Huntingdon meant good time was made up to Peterborough, and even a level crossing failure could not delay our early arrival into Lincoln. The return leg took us back to the East Coast Main Line at Newark, with a good run down to the water stop at Peterborough, and then on to an early arrival at King's Cross. Sadly, time constrains me from covering all of our trips because I do want to show you some of our work at Leeming Bar and more recently at Carnforth. We ran more trains through December before finishing with a final dash from York to Edinburgh with the Edinburgh Christmas Market, before heading back to Leeming Bar for our planned winter maintenance. During December, we had identified 2 separate leaking stays in the firebox that would require removal and replacement. These were cap welded until such time as we could remove them. But sadly, the cab had to be removed in order to replace them. So we took the decision to replace the surrounding stays in areas normally inaccessible. A previous A exam had identified that we would need to repair some cracks beginning to form in the firebox corners. So these were ground out and welded up under the supervision of our boiler inspector, and prior to the steam test, these were subjected to non-destructive magnetic particle testing. The removal of 137 stays took longer than planned, as these were somewhat more stubborn to remove than they should have been. Many seemed initially in good condition, but on closer inspection we realised that we had made a good call to replace them before more failures occurred when the loco was in traffic. And once removed, it's a fairly simple welding task, if you know what you're doing, to replace them. First, welding up the outer end before welding the inside the firebox. As part of the maintenance, all the motion was taken down to inspect the bearing clearances, and the oilways and felt pads were cleaned and replaced before reassembly, and key components were also tested to detect any cracks or flaws developing in the rods or the motion. At the front end, the valves and pistons were examined to ensure no broken rings or other issues were present, and that there was no excessive wear in cylinders or valve bores. And once cleaned and inspected, these were all oiled, replaced, covers replaced and flogged up tight. Attention was not solely focused on Tornado, and our support coach received a great deal of attention inside and out. The kitchen and compartments were thoroughly cleaned by our volunteers, and a local car valeting company left the seats in each compartment looking like new. On the underframe, brake components were removed, sent for overhaul and refitted prior to completing a full annual exam in accordance with our vehicle maintenance instructions. Finally, there was time for a steam test and a couple of days running in before running service trains for the Wensleydale Railway, and the full effects of COVID-19 began to take hold. With our first trains cancelled, we moved the loco and coach to stable at the Railway Museum in York, suitably protected from the elements and the pigeons. As other operating companies began to make plans to restart trains, we completed a full A exam and boiler washout, even though the locomotive had not been long in traffic before lockdown. Following a successful steam test and an FTR exam, we moved across to Carnforth to undertake some work on the locomotive and coach. And after arriving, we began a makeover to assume the identity of lost classmate 60145 St Mungo. Using some water-based poster paints and weathering techniques with advice from a colleague who has weathered complete locomotives in preservation, our full-time staff managed to deliver this, which I think you'll agree is remarkably effective. But why? Well, we had lined up Steam Railway for this front cover image for the September issue. However, it nearly wasn't to be. The team awoke on the day of the photo shoot to discover that exceptionally heavy overnight rain had washed off all the previous 2 days' graft and effort, leaving them just 4 hours to recreate it before the Steam Railway photographer arrived. Our deception at Carnforth wasn't quite complete. No sooner had St Mungo left the yard than the team set to remove all the grease and oil from the outside of the locomotive before it could be moved into the paint shop, where the West Coast Railways team have really worked their magic. Here's the tender in various stages of preparation and painting, and then the finished item with the BR totem applied. Not just on the tender, but the locomotive as well, from rubbing down to the first coats of undercoat, several coats of gloss, and then the final lining out. I hope you will agree with us that the finished article is a credit to the West Coast Paint Shop team, to our own staff and volunteers, and all that have worked to deliver the locomotive into its new BR green livery. I'm not quite finished with the paint shop yet. We decided the support coach was in need of a makeover too, and here is 21249 in the paint shop being rubbed down and filled prior to undercoating, the initial gloss coat, and then the finished item. Finally, many of you will know that DB Cargo's Senior Steam Traction Inspector, Jim Smith, sadly passed away earlier this year after a short battle against lung cancer. Jim was a really great supporter of the Trust, a real character and a friend to many of us. We were very fortunate that he was able to visit the maintenance at Leeming Bar and see so many of his friends there. We were not to know that this would be his last visit to see Tornado, but it was a pleasure to see him as always. So there you are, a very quick summary of some of the highlights of what has been a very difficult year, alongside a glimpse of what we are up to when Tornado is not in traffic, both during the winter maintenance period and also a little bit of fun at Carnforth. I leave you with some pictures of Tornado and our support coach in their new liveries, and I hope you will enjoy them as much as us, out and about on the main line where we belong. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Graham Bunker James, Commercial Director for the Trust, and it's my pleasure to talk to you today about Tornado's rail tours, our other operations, and merchandising as we look forward to the year ahead. Within the marketing and sales area, it's been a very challenging year. The pandemic has seen widespread disruption to a lot of leisure activities, and the way that we use the railway has changed significantly as well. This has tested the office and also tested our systems. We are set up for a level of disruption and the odd cancellation and replanning, but we are not set up for that level of disruption that we have seen. It's therefore a great testament to our team at Darlington that they've been able to do so well. That being said, we have learned a few lessons this year, and we have some enhancements planned with both the booking system and the CRM system so that they work slightly more efficiently. And alongside that, we will also be looking at how we can integrate that with the website. One thing we do know is our new marketing initiatives are working very well, and that people are still very keen to travel with us. And indeed, on our most recent train where we've been able to run, where we ran from Darlington to Liverpool, we found that we could not get any more people on the train within the limits of the COVID guidelines. This is encouraging, given that next year we hope to be much busier. We're also using online and targeted marketing activity much more than before. Now, we're very careful not to overdo that, and if anybody feels their GDPR settings are not correct, please do let us know. But this is about being able to reach customers and supporters with information that's relevant to them. And over time, we hope to get better at that as we learn more of what people prefer. What we do know that people still prefer is a brochure in their hand rather than looking online. In fact, most people like both. And that is something that has remained constant throughout the time we've been operating Tornado. And personally, I totally agree with that. Having a nice, high quality brochure that you can peruse and choose your operation is definitely the best way to go. But also look out for a new website in 2021. We've already started work on that, and we're looking at how others use their websites, what we can learn, but it will be uniquely trust focused. So it should be easier to use, provide more information, and hopefully be a welcome upgrade. It's been a number of years since we last did the website. For Tornado's 2021 programme, we will be looking forward to around 25 operations, and we start earlier this year in February. It's generally a time when the Loco is on winter maintenance, but naturally, with such a small programme of operations in 2020, we can shorten that. Similarly, with the overhaul coming up, that also means we can plan differently. Again, there'll be a mix of our own trains and hires, probably a 50% share of each, and nationwide coverage. With luck, we will be in the north of Scotland, down in the southwest, possibly visiting Kent and in Anglia as well. So a good selection of tours, visiting some regular locations and a few new haunts as well. Clearly, we need to include the redated trains from 2020 and ensure we deliver for our passengers there as well. But it's to be remembered that the Aberdonian is our regular repeat itinerary through the summer and will become a core, as it is now, for the P2 as well as the A1. The advantage, though, is that there aren't really many large steam engines in Scotland throughout the year, and therefore we pick up with like additional duties. So you may see us visiting locations other than Aberdeen whilst we are north of the border. Very pleased to be working with RTC. We've had a busy year with them, even without the pandemic intervening, and they run some interesting tours, which we're pleased to be at the front of. And also, as well, I would expect us to be working with SRPS and maybe others. We are always open to discussions on interesting itineraries that we may be able to undertake. Beyond September 2021, we're not yet 100% clear on what people will want us to do. We also need to time the overhaul carefully to ensure that we get the work done in the most efficient way possible, but get back in for the 2022 season, taking best advantage of the boiler swap opportunities that we can now undertake. We will not need to wait for the boiler to arrive from Meiningen. It will be here before we start the overhaul, and that is a fundamental change to the way that we've been able to work before. So new for 2021, we've been working on an interesting programme that will hopefully attract a number of you to travel with us, as well as the wider public, which make our tours a success. So for the romantics amongst you, Valentine's weekend is one for the diary. We'll be taking a new route for the A1, running out of York towards Darlington and then north from Newcastle. We'll go around the Blythe and Tyne. We've never been there before, which is quite a surprise given it's a northeast route, but we're looking to fix that. Similarly, in the evening, we're going to do a circular tour around Harrogate, very popular in the 1980s and in the early 2000s for steam, but Tornado's never been, and neither has a steam loco been around there for quite a while, so we're looking forward to those. In March, we'll take our first trip to Hull. We've not been able to go before because of a bridge that needed rebuilding to get our large locomotive in, but that's now been done, so we'll run from Hull to Leeds and then over the Sattel and Carlisle in both directions. A very pleasant tour. We will also tweak our Aberdonian programme so that we'll run an additional train on Easter Monday and we'll run from Glasgow, something as of a variation. Also interesting because of the 1960s Glasgow Aberdeen services. Although they ran in 3 hours, we don't quite manage that speed. And we will also not be able to take the same route because quite a lot of that route no longer exists. Also, as well, and a highlight for many, will be the first time ever on the main line of Tornado and Flying Scotsman running together. This will be 2 days of operation on the 16th and 18th of September 2021. There'll be 2 trains running on the same day, and each train will head north with either Tornado or Flying Scotsman at the head, and then the return journey south will have the locos swapping over. So if you're on the train that had Tornado in the morning, you'll have Flying Scotsman in the evening, and vice versa. This is a one-off. We won't do this very often. It is quite an expensive operation to put on, as you would imagine. So we hope that everybody will be able to support that. To have the 2 arguably most famous locomotives in the world at the present time operating together, hopefully in some wonderful summer weather, running over the Settle and Carlisle, what more could one ask for? So all of the above will go on sale from the 1st of October. But for those who would wish to be involved early on, please email the office and we'll make sure that seats are reserved for you. We're going to do this for supporters only, and we will take full sales on about a week later. So we are providing an opportunity for our covenanters, club members, founders, supporters, and those who are involved with the trust to get first chance to book on any of these trains before they go on wider sale to the general public. As you can imagine, it's been a difficult year for the merchandising team. Our great team of volunteers haven't been able to get out and about because of the pandemic, and that's where we make our best sales at preserved lines, events, and of course with Tornado at the head of a mainline train. That being said, the website continues to be the best place to sell things for us, in common with many other businesses, and that's what we will continue to do. And we'll be looking at that in the run up to Christmas. New technology has been bought, and we used it for the first time properly on the 19th of September train, and that allowed us to take credit card and debit card bookings and run our admin much more efficiently. This was very pleasing and will be something of value moving into 2021. We're now reviewing our range of products, and we're looking at making some new things available, including exclusive lines for Covenanters and other supporters as well, making it even better to be in support of the Trust and all its activities. We're also starting to consider options for the P2 launch. That's obviously way away yet, but these things need to be done now so that long lead items can be sourced, processes ironed out, and we are ready for the locomotive taking to the rails. Hope you found that interesting. Thank you very much.
Well, now for the marketing and fundraising part of today's presentations. The first thing I'd like to do is just name check some of the people who are very supportive of all the marketing and fundraising activities that we do. Sophie, who leads on all of our rail tours marketing. Lauren in the office, who supports Sophie on that, and also Lee, who supports me on the fundraising side. Mark and Mandy Grant. Mandy's played a significant role in it, along with Daniela, in putting these presentations together today. Tony Watson and his team, who look after our photographic archive, an essential back office function, without which doing a lot of our marketing and fundraising activities would be much harder than they already are. And our own Graham Langer, who looks after our website and also TCC and other communications as well. As you can see from this slide, we do a whole variety of different marketing communications activities, ranging from public relations, which, as you can see, some of the Steam Railway covers that we've got this year, a significant number in recent weeks of appearances, particularly in the Sunday Telegraph. Our internal communications, so that's TCC, the Tornado Telegraph, and also the Mikado Messenger. We do occasionally advertise in the railway and other press, both in support of donations and driving rail tour revenue. Leaflet production in support of our fundraising campaigns. Obviously our website, which we're due to invest more in over the next year or so, and also other social media activities that we conduct in support of all of those. Our events this year have been more troubling than we'd expected when we were meeting this time last year. Normally we would have a variety of events through the year, our annual convention obviously being one of them, our spring day out, numerous heritage railway visits, our monthly P2 road shows, and our open days twice a month at Darlington Locomotive Works, and of course the talks we do to other people's events. Sadly, due to coronavirus, most of those events that would have happened this year have either had to be cancelled or postponed, and therefore it's been a very big challenge for us to actually get to meet new people who aren't already as aware of us as they might be, and to persuade them to come on board. That's been a particular challenge this year, and it looks like it's going to be a challenge for the rest of this year too. I'm now going to take a look at the different fundraising methods that we use for Tornado. Clearly the most important of these remains the Covenant, an A1 for the price of a pint of beer a week. We did obviously use a variety of other fundraising methods during our time in which we were building Tornado, and some of those carried over into the operational life of Tornado, and others we introduced as well. I'm going to go through each of those one by one. Our A1 for a price of a pint of beer a week Covenant is still the most important tool that we have to raise funds on an ongoing basis for Tornado and keep it operating on the main line. We still have over 1,000 Covenanters donating on average over £11 a month, which brings in around £170,000 a year to support the operations of Tornado. Even then, that isn't enough to actually keep the locomotive operating on the main line, which I'll touch on a little later on. The Tornado team is our club that we use to help to interest those youngsters aged between 5 and 15 in Tornado and everything that the Trust actually does. We've got over 100 members from as far away as Australia, Poland and throughout the United Kingdom. For parents and grandparents, it makes a fantastic Christmas or birthday present. Legacies make up an increasingly important part of the funding to keep Tornado operating on the main line. We launched our legacy scheme in the summer of 2016, and since then we've received around 40 pledges to the office of people who have promised they're going to leave something in their will towards Tornado, and we've also received a number of significant legacies during the life of the project. Over the past year, the Trust received about £110,000 for Tornado, and that will be being put towards Tornado's next today's next overhaul, and of course the payment of for its share of the spare boiler. The I Love 60163 fundraising scheme was launched to raise £60,163 for the unfunded part of Tornado's repairs. I'm pleased to report that over the course of the last year, that target was reached, and this fundraising scheme is now fully subscribed. As we approach Tornado's next overhaul, there is a gap that we still need to fill in terms of funding of that overhaul due to the fact that Tornado hasn't been able to operate on the main line as much as we had hoped during this coronavirus impacted year. We've therefore decided to go back to our roots and to launch in the new year a new fundraising scheme based upon the dedicated donations scheme that was so successful during Tornado's building. We'll go into that in much more detail around the time, but it'll involve being able to sponsor the overhaul or replacement of particular components that will be used during that overhaul. Please look out for the mailings that will be sent out during the early part of 2021. So to summarise, Tornado still needs your help and support to keep her operating on the main line. What we'd hoped would be a spectacular year for our 30th anniversary as the Trust has turned out to be, unfortunately, a quieter one than we would have liked due to the impact of the coronavirus. We're therefore asking all of our supporters to see what they can do to support Tornado during these difficult times. First of all, help us to reach out to recruit more new Covenanters by talking to friends, relations and other family members who may well be people who would be interested in supporting Tornado. When you're able to, please to travel on one of Tornado's tours, and even better, bring some friends and family with you. You never know how they might enjoy the magic of steam. Thirdly, take out one of the Tornado Overhaul dedicated donations that will be launching next year. And finally, help us to recruit new members of the Tornado team and keep the younger generation interested in keeping Tornado where she belongs on the main line. I'm now going to move on and talk about the fundraising for our second locomotive, Greta Class P2, number 2007, Prince of Wales. The foundation for our fundraising for number 2007, Prince of Wales, is our P2 for the price of a pint of beer a week fundraising scheme. The average donation on this is now £15 a month, and that means that we have 930 Covenanters who, over the duration of the project, will have donated around £1.5 million towards building this spectacular locomotive. One of the biggest challenges during 2020 has not being able to conduct the outreach that we would normally do to try and bring on board new Covenanters. We had to suspend our programme of Works Open Days, and we had to do the same with our P2 road shows as well. So though we've managed to have a pretty successful year in terms of our other fundraising tools and techniques that we use, I'm afraid we haven't managed to recruit the number of new people to come on board as Covenanters that we would normally have been able to do so. Dedicated donations I mentioned earlier as part of the Tornado fundraising part of this presentation. I just wanted to touch on these now as far as the role that they play in building of the P2. As you can see, dedicated donations have already played a significant part, with over £400,000 already pledged from supporters who have taken out dedicated donations on components that can start from as little as £25 and go up to £50,000 or even more if you're feeling particularly generous. Launched in July 2014, we've got a target of raising around £1.1 million from dedicated donations. There's still quite a long way to go, but there are an awful lot of dedicated donations that are available to sponsor. Should one not be there that catches your eye, please let me know, and we'll be able to find one that's suitable to any price in any pocket. The Boiler Club's one of the most important ongoing fundraising campaigns we have in support of building our new Grizzly Class P2. As you can see, we've recruited over 200 members to this club so far, so that leaves us with 100 more to find by the end of 2021, when we expect our P2's boiler to arrive at DLW. Sometimes things just don't work out as you'd hope they might do. When we launched the Motion Club, we were hoping that the club would progress at the same pace as the work on the Motion was progressing. Sadly, events conspired against us, and our fundraising campaign and the actual manufacture of the Motion got out of sync. However, as you'll have read in Mercado Messenger and seen in TCC, we've made significant progress in recent weeks with the Motion for our Grizzly Class P2, and the sight of all of that shiny metal enabled us to get the last few members over the line and hit our initial target of 175 members for the Motion Club, which means we've got that £210,000 that's pledged. Manufacture, as you know, is well underway, and I'm sure David Ellett will be covering that in a lot more detail later on. We launched the Tender Club in April 2019 to raise £450,000 to fund the manufacture of the tender, and that club has made steady progress over that time. We've got 80 members out of the 250 that we require so far. In many ways, the tender construction progress has again moved ahead of that of the fundraising campaign that supports it. You can see from the slide here that the tender tank is now all but complete. Progress is very significant now on the tender frame, so it's vital that we encourage as many people as we can to join the Tender Club so that we can now keep up with the pace at which tender construction is continuing. In April of this year, we launched the first of our mini clubs. It was an idea to have something that sits between our dedicated donations and our larger clubs, such as the Boiler Club, to raise the funds for a particular discrete part of the locomotive. We thought that the pony truck would be a very good area to start, and we set ourselves the target of raising £20,000 for the manufacture of the pony truck. We hoped if any more funds that came in over and above that, we'd put that towards the certification costs, which will be quite significant for this part of the locomotive where there have been design changes. I'm delighted to say that we've received significant support in excess of the original 20 people we're looking for. In fact, we've had 30 people come on board so far, which means we'll be able to put those extra funds towards those certification costs, and we're expecting the delivery of the pony truck to DLW in the not too distant future. We launched the second of our mini clubs in June 2020, the Turbogen Club. This was created to fund the purchase and overhaul of our turbo generators, which will be two mounted on number 2007, and each will cost around £40,000. I'm delighted to say that so far 15 people have come on board, with around 18,000 pledged towards the first of those turbogens. Our most recent fundraising appeal is towards the support coach for number 2007. We've very fortunately, as you will have read, managed to identify a suitable vehicle, E35457, to convert into the support coach for number 2007, and the acquisition and the initial work needed is around £100,000. We're therefore looking for 100 people to come on board, to each donate £1,000, and I'm delighted to say that in the short time since we launched this fundraising appeal, 10 people have come on board with around £12,000 already pledged. And it's not just around individuals supporting both keeping Tornado on the main line and also the building of our new Grizzly Class P2. You can see from the slide here we've got the support of the best of British industry, headed by William Cook Cast Products, who've supported us for many years, providing all of our steel castings. But as you can see from this slide, there are a considerable number of local and national organisations who are helping us to keep Tornado on the main line and also to build our new Grizzly Class P2. Although it's still our hope to leave 2007 Prince of Wales debt-free at the end of the construction period, that will very much depend on the fundraising that we conduct over the next 3 years. However, we are looking at other sources of income. We're looking at loan finance if we find that's necessary. Legacies have already started to play a significant part in the funding of our new Grizzly Class P2, and over the past year, the P2 has specifically had £110,000 given to it in terms of bequests, and we're also looking at what there might be out there in terms of grants. Although, as you will remember and recall from the construction of Tornado, it was very hard for us to qualify for grants that were being given towards the overhaul of steam locomotives, because clearly we were building one from scratch. So from a fundraising perspective, 2020 has been a pretty hard year. We haven't managed to recruit the numbers of new covenanters that we'd hoped, and the outreach that we'd hoped to be conducting in terms of road shows and works open days, we haven't been able to do because of the pandemic. Therefore, what can you do to help? Well, when we are able to restart our road shows and our open days, please do bring a friend or a family member along and try and see whether they join us as a covenanter. We very much need to get the Boiler Club and the Tender Club over the line by the end of next year. And if you haven't already joined those, please consider and see whether you're able to do so. And do take a look at our latest appeal, the P2 Support Coach Appeal, because obviously when we finish the locomotive, we need a support coach behind us so she can operate on the main line.
Hello. The next few slides are probably the least interesting, but cover a very important aspect of the success of the Trust. Much of the increase in income was due to the increase in activity by Tornado Steam Traction in operating more trains, both for the Trust and for third parties. The increase in costs was mainly due to the increase in Tornado operations, plus higher expenditure on the P2 build. The Trust has two trading subsidiaries, Tornado Steam Traction and Tornado Merchandising. As income from both support the operation of Tornado, the figures have been consolidated here. The position is considerably improved this year, 2018-19 being a bad year due to the loss of earnings and additional expenditure caused by the failure of Tornado on the Ebo Flyer on the 14th of April 2018. The substantial increase in admin expenses is due to the employment of staff to deal with the bookings in-house as opposed to using a third-party ticket agent. As you can see, Tornado Steam Traction is now a £1 million turnover business, although the dire effect of the COVID-19 pandemic will prevent this being realised this year. P2 income continues to hold up. However, with the need to pay for the new boiler in 2021, a considerable increase in income is needed during the current financial year. The Mikado and Cylinder clubs are now closed, and new clubs Turbogen and Support Coach are now open for joining. Mark Allett will no doubt have more to say on this subject. This is just a summary of how the money has been spent on building the Prince of Wales locomotive. There will be a big increase next year due to the payment for the boiler, the tender and the motion.
Good morning everyone. I'm pleased to present this brief overview of our employees. We all know how difficult this year is, but I'm delighted to advise you that Daniela Filova, our workshop manager, has recently gained her HNC in engineering. A big congratulations to her from all of us. She achieved this in reduced time, which now opens the way for her to study for her degree, and I'm sure we all wish her well for this exciting next step. In terms of team developments, through bringing the management of the A1 and also rail tours in-house, we've grown our team to 8. This carefully considered strategy reduced annual costs by almost £100,000. Conversely, the pandemic has turned the world upside down, of course, and we've not been exempt from the effects of COVID-19. To help protect the business, 4 staff transferred to furlough status in March 2020. As rail tours recommenced, the Loco support team resumed full-time employment in August, and as of today, 1 staff member is still fully furloughed and another is working 50%. Thank you.
Good morning. Understandably, our on-train and events volunteers have had very little to do on the whole. However, we were back with 2 of our own trips last week and the week before. We had help from our friends at the Scottish Railway Preservation Society and the Branch Line Society, as a number of our own volunteers fall into the vulnerable category, and rightly they are taking extra precautions. We're grateful though for everyone's assistance. You can see some of them from the Ticket to Ride in action on this slide. A very different experience stewarding at the moment, social distancing making it more difficult to do our normal job. We try once a year to have a day when we can all get together for a social and training day, but COVID has effectively stopped that. I am looking at a possible virtual meeting in due course. How would we have coped without technology during these past months? However, we are still all in contact with one another and we can all keep abreast of what's happening. We had planned to use some more new technology for our merchandise operations, and although we haven't been able to resume that as such, we have given it a run through on the trains we've run by selling very appropriately face masks. It seems to have gone well and it will streamline that particular side of the business, both on train and at events. As always, I'm after more people for various roles, and as long as you're over 18, you can help us. You may recall my request at last year's convention for more people up in Scotland. Well, a number of you offered your services, and thank you very much for that. It's just a shame I haven't been able to utilise you as yet. But please get in touch if you feel able to help out in the future. My email address is on the slide. As you'll be aware, we have trips already in the diary for the new season, and fingers crossed, I'll need more people willing to help out. Remember that we are predominantly a volunteer-based operation. Without your help, we will not be able to do the things that we do. Finally, a big thanks to everyone who currently volunteers with us. Whatever you do and wherever you are, please accept my thanks for your hard work and commitment in these difficult times. Thank you.
Welcome to the P2 engineering part of our convention. This is divided into 2 sections. The first is a presentation of slides, and this will be followed by a video walk around Darlington Locomotive Works where you can see what's been going on at first hand. As COVID-19 has prevented us from all being in the same room together, I'd like to introduce some of our engineering team. Top left is myself, the Director of Engineering. To my right is Rob Morland, our Head of Electricals, and to his right is Daniela Filova, our Assistant Mechanical Engineer and Workshop Manager. Just below and to her right is Ed Laxton, our Apprentice Machinist, and beyond Ed is Terry Graham, our Project Planning Engineer. On the bottom row we have Alan Parkin, Electrical Design Engineer, and Ian Matthews, our Master Fabricator, Fitter and Coach Painter. The advent of COVID-19 has had a significant effect on our activities, although I'm pleased to say it did not stop them altogether. Once the lockdown was announced in March 2020, all the office-based staff started working from home. Our volunteers were stood down as many of them are old enough to be in the vulnerable or shielding category. Ian Matthews and Ed Laxton were able to continue work in the workshop with social distancing, as fortunately Darlington Locomotive Works is quite big and it's easy to remain a long distance apart. As the restrictions eased, our younger and fitter volunteers have started to return on a limited basis. Not necessarily always to work on the locomotive, as the photograph on the right illustrates James Higginbottom cutting the grass, which by this time had reached about a foot tall. Our suppliers and subcontractors have all been affected to a greater or lesser extent, and this has had some effects on our project plan. For several years, we've maintained a project plan, which has steadily grown into 897 lines and is several feet long when printed. For the first time since the project started in 2013, our ability to order larger value items in line with the plan has been constrained by the availability of cash to pay for them. This is actually a tribute to the generosity of yourselves and our other supporters. As for Tornado, we were cash constrained most of the time. As a result, we've had to adjust the plan based on what is hoped are pessimistic assumptions on the rate of fundraising. Fortunately, Terry Graham has taken over the maintenance of the plan and its associated financial spreadsheets, which has improved the detail of our planning. The summary timeline shows the plan that we had laid out originally back in 2013, which are the green bars, alongside what is actually happening or what we expect to happen, which are the red bars. You will note that the finish date has slipped from 2021 to 2022, as we announced last year. However, in general, things are progressing reasonably well. But this is obviously going to be subject to our ability to continue to raise money in a timely fashion. The adjusted project plan sees many tasks starting later, so that by the time they are complete and the invoices are received, we will be able to pay for them. The completion of the locomotive is still showing as December 2022. However, as we approach completion, less costs are in the form of large purchases and outsources, for example the boiler, and more costs are in labour and small components being worked on at DLW. This increases the timing risk, as large numbers of people working on the locomotive at the same time is inefficient, and at the present time would be actually illegal. We also have problems finding all the different skills we need when they are required. Several sections of the plan are near critical, in other words have little or no slack in them, so a significant delay with one will delay the whole project. However, all is not lost. If we can improve the short-term funding, tasks can be brought forward, and this will ease the pressure on the back of the plan. Last year, this time, we set some ambitious targets for what we hope to achieve over the next 12 months. As you will see from this list, the green is what we said last year, the red is the position we're actually in. COVID-19 has had a significant effect on quite a few of these areas, notably with the pony truck and the boiler. The tender is making good progress, however the frames are somewhat behind the curve at the moment. However, in practice, in reality, we do not need the tender till fairly close to the completion of the locomotive. The electrical trunking approaching completion. We have all the materials here. Most of the components have been made and formed, and installation is about to start. I'm hoping that will be within 3 months we'll have the trunking largely fitted to the loco. Brake linkage. This has been delayed by issues with one particular item, which we're on the edge of having a solution to. Pipework layout complete, installation well underway. The design is now complete and we're about to order materials, so we're not too far behind the curve there. The heavy motion has been a particular problem insofar as the suppliers, Robert Stevenson, have obviously been affected by COVID throughout their organisation, but in particular the forging process requires men to work in very close proximity to one another, and they are struggling to achieve a safe system of work given COVID. The cylinder block, we are significantly behind where we hope to be here, but the design work has taken a lot longer than we estimated in the first place, and this also applies to the valve gear. Whilst our anticipated progress last year has not necessarily been met, we have actually achieved quite a lot, as the following pictures and descriptions will show. The items highlighted on this slide with an asterisk will be covered in the video walk round. Whilst Tornado was at Crew Heritage Centre last year, we came across a pair of rather tired looking accommodation bogies which the Heritage Centre was about to scrap. So we did a deal with them and bought them from scrap value and brought them back to Darlington to overhaul. This initially comprised taking them apart completely and grit blasting them back to bare metal. This became something of a volunteer project. You can see on the left here the wheel sets are being painted from scratch, and on the right the bogies are approaching final assembly. In the meantime, we'd placed the order for the tendered tank with Northview Engineering Solutions here in Darlington. They had previously built Tornado's tender tank, so had some track record in this area. You'll see on the left the shape of all the internal baffling is starting to take place, and by the end of that month the sides and back had been welded on and the tender was becoming something more like the familiar shape. Once the tank was essentially complete, it was taken outside to carry out a water test to make sure that it didn't leak. Once these tests had been successfully completed, the tank was taken to a subcontractor at Peterlee in County Durham for grit blasting. Once the grit blasting was complete, the tender tank was transported to Darlington Locomotive Works as soon as we had a dry day. Once inside, Ian Matthews immediately started on preparing, filling and painting the tank. Once the tank had reached a point where the sides were in undercoat and the front, underside and top were in top coat, the tender was rolled outside to give us room to be able to get the wheels out from underneath the frames. As soon as it went outside, it was wrapped up in tarpaulins to protect the paint, pending the time when we are ready to put the final livery on. Prior to the delivery of the tender tank, the wheel sets arrived from South Devon Railway Engineering down at Buckfastleigh, where the wheels had been pressed onto the axles and the tyres fitted to the wheels. Once they were here, Ian Matthews quickly set about filling the spokes and preparing them for final painting. Simultaneously, the tender frames are being erected by Ian Howitt at his works at Crofton near Wakefield. Ian also did the frames for Tornado, so we have some confidence in that they'll be okay for this one. On the right you will see the brake cross shaft has been set up and prepared for being permanently welded together. Other components that have been made include the handbrake screw and nut, which you can see on the top left. The horn blocks have all been machined, ready to be finally fitted to the tender frame. And the third item you see at the bottom is the handbrake slotted link, which ensures that the brakes can still go on and off when the handbrake is released. The final selection of pieces include the handbrake nut lever, the buffer casings and a full set of tender springs. As you will be probably aware, we have ordered 2 new boilers from Mining and Locomotive Works in Germany, similar to that on the A1 Tornado. These are one as a boiler for the P2, the second to act as a spare for both locomotives. And the first of the pictures here shows a design review that took place back in January, when alongside myself we have Achim Decker, who is the senior boiler designer for Mining and Works, and on the right Udo Dries, who acts as interpreter as well as being something of an expert on steam traction in his own right. The right-hand photo shows the 2 firebox tube plates that have been made by April of this year. By July of this year, Meiningen have already started to assemble inner fireboxes for the 2 boilers. Also, in June, they delivered the first set of superheater elements, which we had asked to receive early, as prior to this we only had a few specimens as spare parts for Tornado, and if the superheater on Tornado developed a problem, it's usually best to fit a complete new set of elements. As you will see in more detail during the video walk around, we had to do some remedial work on cannon and axle boxes where the castings turned out to be rather thicker than was expected. Meanwhile, steady progress is being made in producing the spring gear details, including the coupled spring bolts which you see on the left and the spring links which connect the springs to the undersides of the axle and cannon boxes. Alan Parkin has now completed the detailed design for the new sander installation. The original P2s only had sanders for forward operation, as in the 1930s it was not expected that an express passenger locomotive would have to haul a significant load in reverse. However, today, when we're on heritage railways and for some of the more peculiar operations we have on the main line, such as when we did the plan damp, we will be hauling trains in reverse, and possibly quite heavy ones, so it was felt advisable to put a set of back sanders on in addition to the forward ones. Alan has also been busy completing the detailed design and overseeing the manufacture of parts for the new axle-driven alternator, which we have designed to replace the old 1960s vintage equipment that we have on Tornado and the support coach, for which spare parts are getting very hard to find. This alternator uses a large truck or bus alternator inside a very heavily built protective casing, as you can see on the left. On the right you see a choice of either flat belt or multi-groove V-belt pulleys, and the lay shaft, which is used for the toothed belts which increase the speed of the alternator relative to the pulleys, as is required to get the output over the full speed range of the vehicle. The cylinder block has now reached the stage where we have finalised the detailed design of the fabricated version of the original monoblock arrangement that was fitted to the first P2s. The right-hand view here shows all the welds with the plates and tubes removed, and gives you an idea of the complexity of this construction, with somewhere in the region of 140 separate components in it. Alan is in the process of turning this into manufacturing drawings, which will enable us to go out to various parts of industries for quotations and discussions on constructing the beast. One of the significant areas of redesign on the cylinder block has been the rearrangement of the valves for the middle cylinder to make their characteristics as near to identical as those for the outside cylinders as possible. If you look at the drawing on the left, which is the original block, you will see that the valve chests for the inside cylinder were arranged either side of the middle cylinder. This had the unfortunate result of producing a steam space for the two valve ports which was very large, and this resulted in what is known as a large clearance volume compared with the outside cylinders. This clearance volume is the space which is left when the piston is right up at the end of the stroke in the cylinder. And the larger it is, the less efficient the cylinders are, because steam has to fill that space without actually doing useful work on the axle of the locomotive. Work has continued to refine the design of the valve gear, including the cam box, illustrated here without its outside casing. An additional challenge that has arisen from the decision to group the inside cylinder valves beside one another is that we now have to move the drive for the inside live steam valve across the width of the engine. And this section through the cylinder block here shows a simple rocking shaft which transfers the drive from the inner end of the cam box on the fireman's side of the engine across to the inside cylinder steam valve. We start with machined profiles and detailed components, including the crosshead assembly. We now see the pony truck frame having been tacked together prior to fully welding. This is the practically completed pony truck frame after it's been away for stress relieving, grip blasting and priming. The welds here are of good quality visually and have already been subject to NDT. Alongside the pony truck frame we see the steering arm, and between the arm and the pony truck frame is the crosshead. These are all awaiting final machining. Our charitable status is on the basis that we are an educational charity, and to this end we try to carry out educational activities such as opening the works up and presenting lectures around the country when the circumstances permit. We also encourage youngsters to come into the works and learn engineering, and to this extent Daniela is already just completed the second year out of a 6-year degree apprenticeship in mechanical engineering, where I'm pleased to say that she's just received the award of HNC with distinction. Ed Laxton is in the second year of an apprenticeship in machining in collaboration with Darlington College. We also regularly take short-term students from Middlesbrough and Darlington for practical workshop experience, and from time to time we receive graduates from the big railway for hands-on experience of something different. And on the right here you see from Darlington College Francesca McVeigh in the process of drilling some holes. I will now hand you over to Rob Morland, our Head of Electricals. Rob, being a first-class electronic engineer, occasionally resorts to use of acronyms, and there are two in this forthcoming presentation which you may not be familiar with. ETCS is the European Train Control System, which Network Rail and much of Europe is gradually introducing onto its main lines, and PCB stands for Printed Circuit Board. Over to you, Rob.
I'm now going to tell you about what we've achieved on the electrical system over the past year. Here is a summary of the progress we've made. Design of the electrical system circuits is largely complete. We have built and tested the first P2 shore power supply and a new high-capacity load bank. The I/O panel and battery box design has been built and bench tested. The electronics within the control panels has been designed. We have completed the mapping of the engine electrical system onto its wiring looms and conduits. The new LED headlamp luminaire has been built and tested, and the drive electronics has been designed. We are now preparing our electrical system specification for external scrutiny. All the major electrical circuits have now been designed. Where possible, we've reused the A1 design, updating this if required based on our experience with operating Tornado. The main enhancements include an automatic system for directing power from the two turbogens to the loads, and an additional battery and charger system to power ETCS. With the additional power demands of new systems on the P2, including ETCS, we needed a higher capacity shore power supply. By using modern electronic AC to DC converters, we have been able to house this in the same size box as for the A1. It provides up to 2000 watts from AC mains voltages between 85 and 305 volts. This will cope with the wide variances that we've encountered in some depots. The supply has been built and fully bench tested. To test the new shore power supply and axle-driven alternator, we need a high-capacity electrical load bank. We've designed this to load up to 208 amps at 28 volts, equivalent to 5,800 watts. It uses 8 1000 watt resistors, each cooled by its own fan. So far we have tested it on the new shore power supply at 85 amps. It works fine and heats the workshop nicely. We have completed the electronics design for our distribution boards, or I/O panels as we call them, together with the battery boxes. The designs are based on the A1 system with some simplifications and additional features to improve reliability and assist maintenance. The system has been built on the bench and fully tested. It all works as planned. Design of the essential and auxiliary control panel electronics is complete. The panels provide all the facilities that are on the A1, plus some enhancements in light of experience. we have added a circuit to detect battery fuse failures with LED indicators to alert the crew. As our power supply design automatically takes power from generators if batteries aren't available, a blown fuse may not be noticed until the turbogen is switched off, at which point all the lights go out. Over 350 individual wire nets have been given their own unique identifier. All the engine wiring has been mapped onto the conduit system and enclosures which have been designed by Alan Parkin. 35 separate wiring looms have been defined for the engine. The tender wiring system and looms will be started once Alan has finished designing the conduits. Our optical physicist Roger Millington has completed the design of our new combined LED head-tail marker luminaire. This includes a 3D printed support frame and diffuser. The design allows any of the three aspects to be displayed from the same unit. It will fit within the replica of the original lamps, which is being designed by Alan Parkin. Alan Green, who designed and built the A1 luminaires, has designed the drive electronics, laid out the PCB and built and tested the first prototype. The PCBs are now being manufactured. Looking now at next steps, the P2 electrical system specification is approaching completion. This will be reviewed internally before submitting to Ricardo for independent design scrutiny. Work on the tender electronics will start shortly. We are working with the Network Rail East Coast Digital project to design an ETCS installation for the A1. Key elements of this will be reused on the P2 so that the two locomotives will have the same overall electrical system architecture. We're looking forward to fitting the first electrical items to the locomotive over the next year. Thank you very much for listening.
Welcome to this virtual tour of Darlington Locomotive Works. This, as you're well aware, has come about because with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are obviously unable to look at the locomotive and all the bits and pieces in person this time. The COVID-19 outbreak has had quite a significant effect on the way we work, as it has for most people in the country. The workshop itself has been able to maintain output throughout the pandemic so far because, fortunately, with it being a large area and only 2 or 3 people working in the place, it's possible to maintain social distancing at all times. In other respects, the pandemic has caused us problems with our suppliers, some of whom temporarily closed down altogether, and others have had to slow down and rearrange the way they do things in order to comply with the regulations. Our own office staff have gone home and have been working from home, and this has worked quite satisfactorily. And Daniela, our workshop manager, initially worked from home, but we very soon discovered that she needed to be on the premises here to make sure that she could respond rapidly to queries and ensure that the work packages were carried out smoothly. She's now moved back into the design office, where she is most of the time she is on her own, so again we don't have a social distancing issue there. As you will be aware, there is a very comprehensive electrical system going to be fitted to Prince of Wales, very much along the lines of what's already on Tornado. However, we've made a number of improvements, and as I believe we've mentioned elsewhere, we're making extensive use of stainless steel in all the electrical equipment. And here you see one of the battery boxes, which has been enlarged slightly to give us the option to put bigger batteries in if necessary, as the ongoing requirement for electricity on the locos just seems to keep rising all the time. And this is now being trial fitted to the frames. We have actually had to modify it from our original design for this, as we have discovered recently that we had a gauge infringement with Tornado, in as much as the back footsteps were going to foul one of the stations on the Cumbrian coastline. So we have narrowed them down by 1 inch to get us back into the loading gauge. Interestingly, we have been there before, but it appears that engineering works have gone on both the track and the platforms, which has reduced the clearance. So to make sure we don't have the same trouble with Prince of Wales, we have done the same thing. the footsteps here have been narrowed down by 1 inch, and we have then had to make sure that the battery boxes are not proud of the gauge as well. One of the key differences between Tornado and this locomotive is that this time we are putting a lot more attention into making it easy to remove the cab, which is necessary if you need to do any repairs on the back of the boiler. And to this extent, rather than as on Tornado, where cables from the frames up into the cab go up to sockets right up underneath the drivers' and firemen's seats, we are going to put a series of sockets in the floor of the cab, just raised clear of the running plate, and you'll be able to take this cover off and undo the 4 plugs with their cables and sit them in the space in the top here, and then the cab can be lifted straight off without having to make any more electrical disconnections. There is a similar arrangement on the other side. And what's been happening here is that Ian has been doing subtle adjustments to the boxes and the space in the framework underneath to make sure this is installed, and that when it is finally fitted, there'll be rubber sealing joints to ensure that we keep the water out as far as practical. With the delivery of the last of the spring hangers, we've been able to finally fit them to the frames. And in the case of this one here, we've been able to substitute the original cold turned rivets with driven bolts, which is the way the rest of the frames are assembled. However, there's one here where we have had to retain a cold turned rivet. And the reason for this is that if you can imagine in here, the spring bolt comes up and the spring comes away under here and goes to the other end here. When you need to remove the spring, the thread on the end of the bolt there would get in the way of it and you couldn't actually lift it out. So we've had to put a cold turned rivet in there. And for the purposes of this, Ed made all the cold turned rivets we require, and Ian has subsequently fitted them all. This effectively completes the fitting of all the spring gear, the spring hangers, ready to take the spring gear. The latest arrivals being this, which is one of the 2 brake cross shafts, which transfers the drive from the air brake cylinder to the pull rods that actually apply the brakes to the wheels. We now have all the bits we need to fit these, and indeed we've got the castings here for the bearings, which go on the end of the shaft and the outside of which fits in here so as to enable the brake shaft to be fully installed. And when Ed's finished what he's doing at the moment with the regulator stuffing boxes, he will be onto that task so that we can get both the brake cross shafts fitted. Whilst we substantially fitted the motion brackets over a year ago, there was an outstanding problem insofar as 3 of the bolt holes, here, here and here, needed to be countersunk to take countersunk bolts so that the bolt heads did not foul the back of the tyres on the leading wheel set. This proved to be a bit of a problem because, as you can see, there is very little space between there and there in which to get a drill with a countersink on it. So we got round this problem by making up this apparatus here, which is basically a back countersinking tool. That device, the bush there was placed in the hole, the countersinking tool was threaded through the bush, and a drill attached to the inside end. And in order to apply the feed on the tool here, which is cutting the countersink, this device was made up, which by turning the handle and the nut and the bolt, slowly jacked the countersink into the hole. A piece of really good quality Heath Robinson, which worked very well. Having completed the fitment of these 3 bolts on each side of the engine, we're now in a position where the frames are substantially complete. The only other major structure to be fitted into the frames are the cylinders, which you can see the aperture where they fit here. As those of you will have seen from photographs of the original Cock of the North when it was introduced in 1934, a very high standard of finish was applied to the locomotive. And indeed you'll see we've already polished the wheel rims, but in addition to this, we are keen that the bright work is really finished to a high standard. And to this extent, we've been very fortunate in having a volunteer who loves polishing things. And if you look up initially at the hinge straps and pins on the smoke box door, he has achieved an almost mirror finish on those by working for several weeks with wet and dry of various grades right down to the finest. And when he finished that, he asked if there was anything else we'd like to have polished. I suggest he might like to do the leading draw hook. And as you see here, it is a beautiful job that he's done. Once we've got out of COVID and he can come back to join us, because unfortunately his age puts him into the vulnerable group, I've asked him if he can do the screw coupling that hangs on here as well. Then it'll be just up to us when the locomotive is in operation to ensure we maintain this superb finish on it. Another relatively small job that we've completed over the last 12 months is the riveting of the balance weight plates onto the wheels, so that in due course, when we're ready to balance the wheels, we will pour a lead antimony alloy into the spaces between the spokes to achieve the required weight to ensure that we have the correct level of balance for all the rotating components on the crank pins. One of the major steps forward for this year has been the delivery of the tender tank. Once it arrived here, it was placed inside the workshop, and Ian Matthews then spent several weeks filling, sanding, priming, undercoating, and basically making the tender tank secure paint-wise. At the moment, all the black areas are in finished paintwork, the green is in undercoat. The tender tank is presently sat on accommodation bogies, which we were fortunate to acquire from Crew Heritage just over a year ago and have subsequently overhauled. Interestingly, these appear to have come off Central London Railway stock from about 1920, so are actually antiques in their own right. Now that we've had a good look round the locomotive frames, the tender and the wheel sets, we will move over to some of the many detailed components that have either been made here or are being finished off here at the moment. Ed Laxton, our apprentice machinist, is currently making a whole series of detailed parts for the regulator stuffing boxes and cross shafts for the new boilers. Here you see Ed making one of the stuffing box glands from stainless steel, which, as its name implies, will prevent the steam and water from coming out of the boiler into the cab. These are identical to the components that were made for Tornado back in 2007. These are the two regulator cross shafts for the new boilers that are currently being built in Meiningen in Germany. When they're finished, they will have a regulator handle mounted on each end, which is the familiar bit you can see in the cab.
We hired a new apprentice machinist, but sadly we were embarrassed with the state of our machinery. So as a part of this new arrangement, we acquired a replacement for original Bridgeport milling machine. As you can see, it's a different make, but it's a clone of Bridgeport. It's a well-built machine. It's got a high standard of accuracy. We also purchased a new tooling which is more suitable for this type of machine, and if you will follow me there, you can see the results of our new apprentice machinist's work. This new milling machine's got nice features. The main one, it's a digital readout. That's a big improvement over the previous one, because this allows us to set up jobs more quickly and produce work more precisely. Another of these new features, it's a driven axis. So for a small adjustment, we can move the table manually, but we can set it on auto feed and let it go during the milling. Also, another improvement is that it's not only one axis which is driven, there is another one, the cross slide, which works in automatic mode as well. This saves a lot of time. The last feature which has been added, and it wasn't on the original machine, it's a quick tool release or clamping system, which is pneumatic, and you just need to press a button to release a tool, put new one in, press a button, and you can start machining. Again, amazing save of time.
Here we see a selection of components for the cylinder drain cock gear, most of which has now been manufactured, and we hope to be starting to put this on the engine in the very near future. We also have components here for the pony truck. These are spring cups which locate the springs centrally on their bolts. One of the problems that afflicts us from time to time, and particularly as time passes by, is that equipment that we bought for Tornado and was apparently in full production and likely to be for a long time, eventually becomes obsolete. And one of the things where this appears to have happened is the 12-inch brake cylinders that are used on Tornado's engine and tender, and for which we have chosen to use on the P2 and may even use on the V4 in future. These are actually used on almost all the mainline air brake steam fleet. Unfortunately, the manufacturers in Macedonia appear to have stopped making them, which presents us with a bit of a problem. There are other brake cylinders available, but their geometry is different, so that we would have to redesign the brake system on both locos to be able to use it. So as a precaution, I have completely dismantled this brake cylinder, which is Tornado's spare, and have reverse engineered it by producing a 3D CAD model which is accurate as we possibly can make it, so that if we are unable to source new ones of these off the shelf, we can actually manufacture our own in future. These are the top and bottom halves of a cannon box for the intermediate and trailing axles. Unfortunately, when these were delivered by the machinist, we discovered that this area around here, where you see bare metal, the casting was actually over thick, and when we tried to fit the spring links which go into this gap here, they wouldn't go in properly. So Ian and Ed between them contrived a jury rig to enable us to machine extra material out of this area using our gate milling machine, which really isn't quite big enough for this job, But as the photograph that you will see next shows, we managed to produce a setup which enabled us to do the machining with the gate machine. One thing we find with this locomotive, as indeed we did with Tornado, is that some of our suppliers don't quite get everything right. There is a certain risk behind this because a lot of what we do is unusual or unique and is not familiar to them. And one example of this is that the tender wheel sets, which were delivered some time ago, when we inspected them closely, we discovered that the stamping of the details of each axle on the end of each axle had not been done correctly in line with the British standard. So we called the company back to fix this, and this indeed only happened yesterday. They have ground off the old markings and applied the markings correctly using a low stress dot matrix stamping machine, which overcomes the problems of using ordinary metal stamps which have sharp corners on them, which might ultimately cause a crack.
As you can see here, nicely laid out on a bench, we introduced a system of job cards for each job we are going to start. This is a big improvement in organization on a workshop floor. This job will consist of drilling these boxes, which are part of a structured trunking, and then welding in these couplers. As you can see from the color of material, everything is stainless steel, but now we are well equipped even to weld this material.
One of the less fortunate consequences of having taken the decision to put all the electrics into stainless steel is that stainless steel, when in contact with mild steel, has a habit of electrically corroding the mild steel it's attached to. And to prevent this, all the boxes that you see here will be mounted on insulating panels, in this instance made of Paxolin. And then when the whole thing is put together, we will earth the entire electrical system in one place only via a copper braid to the frame, and this should avoid the electrolytic corrosion which would otherwise take place if these boxes were mounted straight on the frame. Apart from the issue of corrosion, rusting and degeneration due to chemical action of the steel conduit on Tornado, another problem that has occurred from time to time is the fracturing of screwed joints in the conduit work. To overcome this, we have largely eliminated them, and to enable this to work correctly, instead of having a screwed joint, we have a joint ring like this with a small groove in it which contains a rubber O-ring, and then a piece of pipe. The next piece of pipe is just slid into there and the O-ring keeps the moisture out. The benefit with this is that as the locomotive frame flexes, this can move in and out very slightly without incurring excessive stresses which lead to failure of the pipes in places. As we can see here, Ian is in the process of manufacturing the many components for the structured trunking system which will carry the electrical wiring throughout the locomotive. This is a significant advance on what we did with Tornado, in as much as following experience with corrosion and one or two fractures of joints, the whole electrical system is being placed in stainless steel pipework and boxes this time around. The pipework has all been drawn from scratch. On Tornado, we worked off schematic diagrams and essentially laid the pipework out by me waving my arms about and asking the electricians to put the pipework in specific places. Unfortunately, this led on a number of occasions to having to do the job 2 or 3 times before we got it right. So this time we made a decision that the entire pipework, both for electricity, air, water and steam, was going to be fully drawn, and to avoid the risk of clashes between various systems. And so far this looks to be working quite well. Our electrical designer Alan has produced most of the drawings for the pipework system, the conduit system, and you see Ian is currently manufacturing one particular pipe from the drawing that Alan has provided. Alan has produced several dozen individual drawings of pieces of conduit work, and Ian is in the process of transcribing these into full-sized layouts in chalk on the bench here, which he will use to create the correct form for the pipe. The pipes are being largely hand-bent with heat, and then, where necessary, dressed to get the appearance correct. And we are very hopeful that when this lot is placed on the locomotive, it will all fit. Here on this piece of scaffolding, we have a selection of the pipework which Ian has already made up to form the conduits for the electrical system. Later this year, we expect to be doing much the same thing for the copper pipework for the steam, water and air systems. Monday the 21st of September was a milestone for us, as the first of our coupling rods arrived from Arthur Stevenson's engineers at Atherton near Manchester. These go between the second and third coupled wheels, and the large hole you see at this end goes round the driving crank pin, which also carries the outside connecting rod. The opposite end goes on the third axle, and extending from either end of the coupling rods are what are known as the knuckle or gradient pin joints, which allow the coupling rod assemblies to move vertically as the locomotive moves over uneven track. We're now looking into the oil box, which will ultimately have a cover on it with a cork which enables you to fill the box up, and the tube in the middle is known as the siphon tube, which carries the oil down through a felt pad into the bearing, which we still have to manufacture. There is still quite a lot of work to do in fettling these rods to remove the machining marks. Last week I received an email from a long-standing volunteer here at Darlington Locomotive Works, Gordon Wells, who also does a lot of work with the North Eastern Locomotive Preservation Group and the North York Moors Railway. And the nub of the email was that they had found a continental type turbo generator in their stores, which they estimate had been there for about 20 years, and would we be interested in it? At which I replied immediately, yes please, and I'm pleased to say that today we were able to go over to Gromont and to pick up this turbo generator. Having got it back to Darlington, I took 1 or 2 of the covers off and had a look at it, and was astonished to find that the condition it was in. The rotor and the dynamo rotated freely, the steam control valve looked like new, and so I thought we might try and see if it would work on compressed air. Although the improved pony truck design that we are fitting to 2007 is very closely based on that which was fitted to the V2 class post-war, it is sufficiently different, and because it's basically a safety critical item, that it is necessary that we do some analysis on this to ensure that it's going to be strong enough to do the job. There's also the point that because of the criticality of it, we have appointed one of the Derby railway consultancies to independently review the strength and behaviour of the pony truck to make sure that we haven't missed anything. This is a finite element analysis stress view of the pony truck frame, where basically the colours represent stresses in the metal with the maximum likely load applied to the pony truck. Now, the nearer to red it is, the higher the stress. And what this has shown up is that there are certain areas where we have had to take great care in the design of the welds, and indeed have slightly altered the profiles of the welds to minimise the maximum stresses that are being experienced. If you swing slightly to the right and look at the screen here, you will see there is actually a scale of what this all means. And in practice, the good thing about this is that the highest stress that has been looked at there is actually the yield stress of the material, and we've now got the design such that we're nowhere near the maximum yield stress in any part of the structure. And most of it, as you will see where it's green and blue, the stresses are very low indeed. As is to be expected, the high stresses are occurring in the corners of welds and around holes where we've got bolts put through. This is another simulation we can do with the finite element analysis system, where we can actually show the displacement of various parts of the pony truck frame when the load is gradually applied and then released. The actual movement you see is very highly exaggerated. In practice, it's small fractions of a millimetre on the real thing. This concludes our virtual tour of Darlington Locomotive Works. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and we very much hope that next year you can come here in person.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, what I'd like to do is to expand on some of what I call the major policy issues that we have defined, I think through a natural process, but have formally been announced during my time in office. Now, the first one is the issue, and this is for absolute clarity, so you understand what's going through our minds, the issue of 90 miles an hour. Now, we're all well aware of what happened to Tornado. That was an unfortunate incident, and the engine is more than capable of 90 miles per hour. But the cost of preparing the engine to do a 90 miles an hour run becomes almost exponential over and above 75 miles per hour. In addition, there is undoubtedly in some quarters in the modern railway probably a degree of concern about 90 miles per hour, and we need to recognise that we need to keep people on board and friends, and train operators who are going to be managing our machines are not as keen on 90 as perhaps we were. So as a consequence, we will not be routinely travelling at 90 miles per hour on advertised trains. That does not mean we won't be maintaining a 90 miles per hour capable locomotive. The engine is capable of 90, and if we are invited to do that speed, let's say for a special occasion, let's say for a royal event or whatever, we would of course seriously consider that. So we're maintaining an engine at 90 miles per hour capable, but we will not routinely run it at 90 miles per hour. The next issue is that there was at one time an ambition to own our own train. That is no longer our ambition, because at the time the objective of acquiring our own stock was as a contingency against stock not being available on the main line such as Mark 1s. But that issue seems to have faded, and we are confident that actually stock will be available to us of the correct type for the foreseeable future. The V4, we will be making announcements late next year and formally launching the V4. We have in mind a name. I will not release it at this stage yet because I think that would blow some of the great publicity. But all I would say is that at the moment we have one engine that's associated with the Royal Air Force, we have another engine which is associated with the Royal Navy, and not surprisingly, given my background, we're going to have a third engine which will have an Army connection. And as it says on the badge on our logo, more anon. As I alluded to in my introduction, the Darlington Locomotive Works 2, an uninspiring name I'm sure, but we'll come up with something better in due course. The progress on that is huge, and what will happen is we will see the completion of the P2 here in this building ending at the end of 2022 into early 2023, and at that point we will transfer to our brand new facility, and that is where we will start construction of the V4. In terms of running in, the P2 will undergo a number of trials in 2023 with the objective of having a series of mainline runs in 2024 to make sure that she's in absolute fine fettle to take a full and active part in the Stockton and Darlington 200th anniversary in 2025. Turning to that, Stockton and Darlington 200, or SDR 200, or Stockton and Darlington Bicentenary, whatever the formal title might be, the planning for that is moving forward at some pace. Some of it is in the railway journals, but be reassured that Darlington Borough Council and Tees Valley are already working really hard on the subject. I mean, the most high profile issue at the moment is Darlington Borough Council's campaign to retain locomotion number 1 here at Head of Steam in Darlington, and we the Trust are supporting with every fibre of our being the council in that endeavour. But there will be a major announcement in due course by the council about the component parts of Stockton and Darlington 200, and of course we, the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust, intend to play our part with not one but 2 magnificent apple green steam locomotives. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming towards the end of our virtual convention, and although it's not the same as meeting in the convivial surroundings of the hotel here in Darlington, I do hope that you appreciate the extent to which we've tried to bring you together in a collegiate way to share in the great news, and for you, of course, to see with your own eyes and hear with your own ears just what we've been doing with your money. And we can spend more of it. Now, if like me, you are proud to be British, I think you'll feel that what we're doing here at Darlington and elsewhere is something actually quite quintessentially British. We're a crazy nation. We never know when we're beaten. We certainly enjoy taking on Mission Impossible, and for those of you remember the A4s coming together, everyone thought that was Mission Impossible, but there are those who would have been our detractors who one day would have said at one point, this is Mission Impossible. Well, it's not. It's here, I'm touching it, it's real, it's live, it's metal, and in a couple of short years, this thing will of course be utterly wowing the crowds. Now, at the expense of being accused of being a stuck record, and you'll get bored with this theme. But if every one of us and more, and your friends, contributed just a little bit more into this project, we will be well set to deliver it in time for the end of 2022, early 2023. So many of us want to see this machine come together. We want to see it in all of its magnificence. We want to see it in a form which is far more efficient than it was when Gresley built it. And David Elliott and our engineering staff are working really hard to ensure that those faults and those weaknesses with the original engine, such in terms of valve gear and the pony truck, are engineered out. It's an extraordinary project, and I really do hope that you feel that both you're excited about being part of it, but most importantly, you want to see it happen, and you want to see it happen soon. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for your attention. I hope you've enjoyed the day. It's been great for us to know that you're out there looking in, and if there's any questions we can answer subsequently to this event, please let us know. Take care, God bless, and thanks for all your support for what we do here at the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust.